You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Shoe In Show. Happy spring, depending if you're in Northern Hemisphere or Southern Hemisphere. Could be fall, could be spring, could be fall. Who knows? Crazy world. Matt, how are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well, man. Good to be back at the helm with you. Like you were on maternity leave for a while, so I was doing episodes and I was gone and you were doing episodes. So we've joined forces like the Wonder Twins and Super Friends, and we're back, baby.
Awesome. I love it. Let's get into it. Who do we have today to interview?
We have Jon Paul Trudeau, who's the Vice President of Product Operations at Wolverine Worldwide, otherwise known as JP. JP, thank you for coming on Shoe In Show. You and I were in Ho Chi Minh City together not too long ago. We were talking about having you on, and you're a rock star. You're an expat rock star, my friend. So welcome to the program.
Yeah, I don't know if I could live up to that, Matt, but yeah, it was a great to have you at the Wolverine Summit. First time in about 5.5 years.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, that's what, your 10th time, 11th time?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. It's crazy. It was awesome. Well, before we kind of unpack the current lay of the landscape, if you will, as it relates to sourcing and supply chain, particularly in Asia, how did you get in the industry, man? How did you end up out in Asia? Kind of what's your journey?
Good question. Yeah, good question. Probably the most zaniest of everything is I was in a rock band with somebody who was a designer at the time in Reebok. And I was just asked, I said, hey man, would you come in? You like to do the digital stuff with design. How about being kind of our digital photo and visual expert? And I said, sure. Went in for the first time and didn't hit it off right away. 6 months later, came back and I was in Reebok design. So did that for about 2 years. Frankensteining shoes, what we called custom footwear design, which was around 40% of the Reebok's business at the time. Just taking an upper from a different style, a different model, and then, amalgamation with another bottom. And I said, hey, I would really like to learn more about how shoes are put together. And I had a couple trips out to Asia, and then voila, some of the guys, felt that it was the need to put me in the Reebok shoe school. Did that, traveled around Korea, Taiwan, and China, and the rest is kind of history. 22 years later. Yeah. So yeah, moved around a lot, and yeah, I've been blessed. Moving in the different departments from design, development, costing, and then,
Before Andy asks you a more technical and specific footwear question.
Sure.
What instrument did you play in the rock band? What was the style? Were you a singer?
Yeah, drums.
You had a hair. What was it?
Yeah, I had dreadlocks at the time with a big nose ring. Yeah, totally not corporate. Yeah, it was a heavy rock band, Boston band, and drums. Still playing drums to this day.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Tell me a bit about your day to day when you're working, because obviously some people to the show don't know sourcing, don't know manufacturing. They may be in marketing, they may be in accounting. That's the beauty of our podcast, is trying to connect the industry and make it stronger. But from your day to day, what is your job and what do you do, just so people can better understand what's happening? And so you can tell your bosses you're actually doing work in Asia. This is a good way to leverage that.
Yeah, good questions, Andy. I think first and foremost, we're looking at product, right? Our industry doesn't go anywhere. Our brands don't go anywhere if we're not concentrated on product. The next thing is really building teams, working with the leadership, doing a lot of traveling, Vietnam, Bangladesh, to build and empower our local talent. And then obviously trying to mix and match. What do we see as that 3-year vision, and just making sure that we're honest, much like what I presented in the summit, the Wolverine Summit, is what do we see for 3 years down the line? What are the things that are going to be challenging? Pivoting it out of China is one of the biggest things, and just trying to find competencies in those other countries. So day to day, lots of product, lots of building teams, and obviously lots of mixing and matching with the demand plans.
How do you feel about the movement out of China? How is that going? What percent are you at now, or feel like you can be in the next couple of years? Like kind of a mix among countries?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I mean, we're trying to pinpoint less, around 15%, 50% less. I think The biggest challenge is just lead times, right? Because even if you wanted to get, as we do target and focus out of China, a lot of materials are still there. So we're lead times, localization of materials, and then also having factories who are ready to do just about everything, right? From a technical running shoe. In our business, we have so many brands, right? Goodyear welted boots to technical running product to outdoor trail stuff. That's a big grind, right? China has been certainly masters of competencies and making sure that they can mimic a lot of things very quickly. So that's where we're still finding some challenges. Yeah, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So just so our listeners are well aware, Wolverine's stable of brands are Merrell, Saucony, the two big ones, obviously.
That's right.
Wolverine and Harley Davidson. And who else is out there that I'm missing?
Yeah, we got Chaco. We've had Hush Puppies, right, in the stable portfolio of brands.
Yep.
High Test, Bait, right? Anything from a construction from originally when we had Sperry and Kids, we had a lot of vulcanized casuals. And so factories dealing with a portfolio of factories to support that portfolio of brands was definitely difficult. And then to consolidate. So two biggest things. Then Saucony and Merrell continue to be our two biggest horses in the race. And then we also acquired Sweaty Betty a couple of years ago. So that brought a new apparel mix into this. So,
I was telling Andy during a different conversation about how I think critical it is that companies do what you all do, and that's gather your entire supplier base in one room with your leadership.
Exactly.
Talk about the vision of the company and the ups and the downs. And if companies aren't doing that, they should really think about doing it, because you guys really set the tone in that room for the entire year. I think you should be commended for doing it.
Yeah, thank you. With Bishu Jaram, who's my boss, he's our chief supply chain officer. Great guy. Obviously wants to connect the brands and also our factories and just lay out the land, just be very transparent as an organization. And to continue to do that, you got to pull them in. You got to pull the factories in. You got to pull our leadership in. We just had Chris Hufnagel over, as you saw, as well as Rob Griffiths, who's head of Saucony, and Janice Tennant, head of Merrell. And to hear them speak up in front of them is, it's tried and true to listening to what that vision is and what type of product we're going to put out in the market.
Yeah. So Andy, in JP's presentation, he's probably a little humble about it, but he kept showing these action shots. A certain person wearing the product, whether running a marathon or whatever. Not me. Ironman. It was JP. He was like in all the events. So
I just want to digress for a minute there, just to tell that story. Yeah. Not humble or not. I was really, really overweight 6 or 7 years ago and a real heavy smoker. But I think at one point my wife comes up to me. She says, you really got to do something about this. She was worried because I was trying to break out sourcing with the kids group Stride Right originally in the old Wolverine days, and just running a million miles for work, but not taking care of myself. So little by little, I started to get on the treadmill, and I said, let me see if I can run. So I would do 1 minute run, 2 minute walk. And then 6 months later, a friend of mine at New Balance said, you know what, you should really just try running outside. And I'm like, no way. I need a cloth. I need the water bottle. I need all that. And so I tried one day and I said, dude, I'm never going back. I'm never going back to the treadmill. All right. So just a long story of trying to get myself on the road.
That's awesome. Good for you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Let me, in terms of changing from like China to Vietnam and other places, when we're, some people are moving into existing factories, some people are building new factories. Are we as an industry doing a good job of looking at automation and building in automation for some of the new factories that we're looking at? Because I know obviously we're chasing cheaper labor, but in places like Vietnam, labor costs are going up pretty high. Are we doing a good enough job of figuring out and innovating around, are we innovating out touches and creating efficiencies like we should be doing?
Yeah. I mean, there's two schools of thought there. One is that we are, and that we're doing a lot of computerized stitching, and that we're looking at ways of engineering. I think we're still falling really short in our industry. I don't think that there's anything that's been particularly innovative. So the other school of thought is we're not doing enough. We're not doing enough to find enough that's out there, new machinery and new ways to replace that skill set. I still think as far as attaching an upper to a bottom, right? And we could have some robots being glued to an upper and a bottom together, but I still feel like we have to have some design ramifications, which we fall short. There's some concessions that have to be done in order to do that. So we're still the tip of the iceberg. There's still a lot more to investigate, and it's going to take a lot of more mining into other industries in order to bring that to offset that labor cost as we move into like Bangladesh.
Yeah. What are you seeing in terms of material innovations that got you excited over the last several years? I mean, I think we're always looking at
mesh. Yeah. Mesh is definitely the textiles from myself, and as Matt said, going to some of these events like the trail runs and the marathons, really just making things lighter, meshes and also compounds. There's so many running brands right now doing so many different cool things. Even some of the China local brands with the compounds and the plates. But yeah, the textiles, the compounds, the plates, all are pretty fascinating what everyone's coming up with in our industry.
Do you think in that, like, we always think about narratives if we walk, when we used to go to Magic and walk FN Platform and WSA, there'd be these trends like every show, right? One would be like, oh, it's comfort. And the next one would be like, oh, it's comfort. And so comfort's been this thing, but are you now saying like the next 6 months to a year, that conversation is really going to shift to, and some people have already done it, but like weight, like lighter, beyond the runners, because I think runners are the different, for the casual consumer when they walk into the store. Yeah. Is that where we're going to be marketing to them, that their footwear is going to be more comfortable and lighter? Is that the idea? Or breathe?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. Outside of the running space, I was in a Nike store today, just looking at different product, because you got to be looking at competitors, right? You got to be looking at all types of things. But I'm noticing, particularly with the Hoka, with the Ons, things are gravitating to that space where, the consumer isn't just looking for a heavy shoe. They're looking for something breathable, something light, something comfortable. So it doesn't have to be a runner. I mean, how many people are out there wearing Hokas who aren't runners?
Right.
A lot, right? And right? So, so many consumers are wanting that breathability footwear to jump on a plane, to go for a walk, whatever.
Yeah, I had a conversation. Let me just make this point, Matt. Sorry. There's a podcast out right now with Mike McCauley, who runs a Fleet Feet in Augusta. And we had interviewed him 5 years ago. And
I heard it. Yeah, I listened to this. I listened to the last podcast.
Yeah. So Mike's point was...
Andy Polk.
Yeah, exactly. Do you want to make it, JP? Because we can work together. It will be the ultimate.
Walking the dog every day, Andy. Walking the dog every day.
But his point was 5 years ago, his mix was 80-20 runners, right? Heavy runners going into the fleet. And now it's 80 casual. So to your point, it's very interesting how even a running shoe store now is getting people who are like me, who aren't marathon runners or traditional runners. So I think that point's well taken. Sorry, Matt, I didn't want to step over, but I think it was just an important point to make on that and talk about the.
I totally agree. It was totally apropos. I was going to go back to kind of sourcing landscape with you, JP, real quick. So if we think about prior to COVID, you had Vietnam had been a decade of growth. It was taking market share from China. Indo is hanging out there with a percent or two. And then everything else was, 95% of U.S. imports were from those three countries. Then COVID hits, demand skyrockets, the waters of sourcing flooded the zone. And so we were back in Brazil, and then we're going to Mexico.
All sorts of places. Guatemala. Yeah.
Guatemala. Let's probably something in Guatemala. Those waters are starting to recede, right?
I think so, yeah.
My question for you is, who that second tier list, the Indias, the Bangladeshes, the Mexico, who is still going to be able to hold on to market share in this new environment as the waters of demand have receded and we're back to kind of leaning on our laurels, Vietnam, China, Indo? Are there other markets you're bullish about?
Yeah, I think as we look into that, particularly for the boot brands, those who use leather, Bangladesh will be continuing to be our prime target. Indonesia will still look at, particularly for the athletic area. Those markets, they got to have their mold shops. They got to be able to localize materials. We've struggled along the way to keep so many of our other areas of manufacturing viable. DR, India, right? Some Central America sites. We have teams there, but it's been a struggle because we always have to import, right? And the lead times then, as we're pivoting out of China, lead times and the localization of materials, like I said earlier on in the show, those are your two big headaches, right? Because the consumers are not going to wait, the brands are not going to wait,
right?
And the more they got to wait for it and then pay for it, that's definitely not going to be in the cards.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so it sounds like, based on that feedback, that you're pretty comfortable right now in continuing to be bullish on Vietnam, try to bring as many materials out of China as possible into Vietnam.
Exactly.
Expand a little bit into Bangladesh, Cambodia. Where, the pouch in investment in India, does that mean anything to you guys? Walmart's, active there. Like, how do you feel about India?
Yeah, we had our India office for the last 20 years. The biggest hurdle right now is really trying to import things into India, from whether it's make out side and then import in, or even from the material side. If there's some capabilities that are not present, even the materials get taxed, right? The BIS was implemented, then it was pushed out till later this year in August. And it's difficult because as we get out of the casual space, there's not a lot that we can do inside India for the moment, right? IMEB or injection phylon, difficult. And so, we're still looking at India, but for long term, we're still focusing on Vietnam, trying to speed up Indo and then also Bangladesh.
That's interesting. I think it's interesting just because we sometimes think of sourcing our product holistically, and you look at trade numbers, but like, to your point, it's like the construction matters, the type matters to the factory, and what you can do and what you like. And so that will also determine like where you can dip your toe and where you may not want to dip your toe. You know? So that's it's always interesting. How do you go ahead, Matt?
I think there's a symbiotic relationship with Wolverine and some of his factory partners. If you think of Gold Chang, and if you think about Right Rich and Pao Chin, you guys have been with them forever. And so you're going to jump in a pool, you're going to hold hands and jump in the pool together. Or you're going to push them in maybe a minute before you jump in. But, there's an important symbiotic relationship between you and your factory partners that people should not take for granted.
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing for us as we unload some of the brands that we've done is it allows us to consolidate and mean more to these partners. Can't ask some of these partners to go into Bangladesh or to go into another country where they don't have resources, that they don't have talent yet, right? So it is a symbiotic relationship, as you mentioned, Matt.
Would you say it's a golden supply chain with Golden Chain? Is that what we're talking about here? The
blurb, right? That would be great blurb. Yeah. But no, they've been terrific. Helping us build Bangladesh, that's for sure.
Interesting. How do you find like one of the big things we always deal with, and it ebbs and flows, but compliance is huge for factories and productivity and production. And so now we have Forced Labor Prevention Act, which is a huge kind of layer that we add on top of our compliance to make sure there's no slave labor in our supply chains, mainly focused on China. Right. It can bleed out. They could transship. They could make something in Xinjiang and ship it to India, then ship it back. So there are concerns about that. But when you look at like Vietnam, how do you look at factory compliance and worker hours and things like that? Is it more stable? Is it easier to deal with than, say, China?
I think overall, from a compliance standpoint, you have to work with strategic partners. I think in the old days, when you're trying to make a shoe transactionally, and this is why the 3-year vision is so important, working with strategic partners, making sure that they hold themselves and we hold them accountable, particularly as we flex more quality aspects of looking at the product day to day. We hold them accountable for a very high level of, of compliance going in there. I don't think Vietnam or any of the other regions are any less trickier as we go in, as long as we stick to our guns with the strategic supply chain. And as we said, symbiotic relationships with those key factory partners, right? More volume, more pairs, more money.
To kind of wrap it up, I did want to ask you just about the expat community in Vietnam. Matt was there recently.
Yeah.
And we've had some new folks head out that way now that, COVID's over. We see people going back out there, being assigned into Vietnam. So it's just interesting. What's the expat community like there? Is it collegial?
I think it's very lively.
Hybrid?
Yeah, it's very lively. Yeah, we've got a couple of our leaders are wrapped up in the shoe dog community there, and I know Asco is a pretty big leader in there. Working with the community outreach. Currently, we just had 2 weeks ago where we're given to an orphanage, and we're making sure that we're not just, it's not just expat happy, but also we've got local leaders there. We've got leaders from China, leaders from Vietnam, all in that community. And it's great to see. I think as people start to leave China and get into Vietnam, they realize that life is better, right, in Vietnam than it was probably for the last 5 years, particularly after COVID and dealing with that. But the one thing that we have to realize is that as life gets better in whatever specific country where we manufacture, that's a telltale sign that it's at some point we're leaving, right? Because we're going to be manufacturing in Bangladesh, in parts of India, right? In other places where we may not feel like we can just, get a hamburger, cheeseburger, whatever, right? So that's, yeah.
Is that why you guys have hung back in Hong Kong? Like what's it like in Hong Kong these days?
It's getting back to normal. It's having gone through it in the last 6 years of first protest, hunkering down, and then the 2+3 years of COVID, and then wearing a mask. I think Hong Kong was one of the last countries to stop the mask mandate. And so having kids and being an expat in Hong Kong was pretty tough. There was times where we left for longer stints of time just so that I could travel, just so I could get to my teams. So yeah, but it's coming back in a big way.
Yeah. I will say there are new innovations that are coming to the fore with food. So Taco Bell is launching, a drone that will deliver it. And with the amount of sodium in a taco from Taco Bell, you probably could get it from SoCal out in Bangladesh if the weather permits. It might take a couple of days, but it would stay crunchy. Don't worry. I mean, you get the word, the double crunch just to make sure.
It's got to be beef. It has to be beef. Got to be beef. Can't be pork.
All right.
Cultural considerations. Interesting. I'll write that down in this model for my new business. Yep.
You got it.
There we go. Listen, JP, we really appreciate you taking the time and sharing insights of your personal. Yeah. I think part of these conversations, folks, is about hearing people's shoe stories, what's happening on the ground. Right. The whole point of the podcast is trying to help connect the industry and make us all stronger. So JP, we appreciate you taking the time to do that with us today and listen to the other, like JP, listen to the recent podcast. So folks, you can go on shoeandshow.com as our complete catalog. We've been doing this for many years. And I would say the stories still hold up. Like even if you go back 5 years, the personal stories are fantastic. Sadly, we're still dealing with some of the same issues of the supply chain as 5 years ago. I digress. But go back and take a listen. Each Monday, we've got a new episode dropping. So we appreciate everyone listening. Tell your colleagues, spread it around. And on behalf of Matt and Team FDRA, Shoe-In is out.
Shoe-In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.